Audi's popular mid-size Q5 SUV has been around for the last 13 years in conventional wagon form. But it's only now that Ingolstadt has decided to jump on the coupe-shaped bandwagon with this, the new Sportback, to take on the likes of BMW X4 and Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe. This is the flagship SQ5 version, a recipe that's been on Audi's global menu for the last 8 years in petrol or diesel forms. There's no prizes for speculating that a red-hot RSQ5 will eventually surface. But for now, this sport-themed S-grade shoehorned into this Sportback body is all the Q5 you can eat. This tree topper lobs at 110,900 as a clean skin. It's also powered by a new turbo diesel V6. So in this video we're going to see how much the oiler impacts the driving experience, and we'll see whether or not the Sportback form is as impractical an option as some might presume. The timecodes are below if you want to skip ahead, and now's as good a time as any to hit subscribe if you want future updates. So let's start with a big reason why you might be drawn to the Sportback. It's styling. You can argue until you're red in the cheeks that the SQ5 Sportback isn't a real coupe because it has more than 2 doors. But you'd be wrong anyway. By design convention, a coupe is a silhouette that slopes away from the B pillar rather than the C or the D pillar, regardless of the boot or the door count. However, this particular Sportsback take does challenge tradition. Its roof contour is quite flat. From some angles, there's an argument that it's no more coupe-like than many stylised sedans or wagons. In fact, the coupe-like effect owes much to the upswept window and body lines and the shape of the DLO. Hatchback, crossover, liftback, call it what you will, but it's a sophisticated design that's eager to separate itself from SUV convention. It gets a fetching Gen 2 facelifted front end with an S-specific design, a single frame honeycomb grille and matrix LED headlight jewellery. Key to the hunkered down appearance is that the SQ5 loses the plastic cladding across the arches and skirts, which visually draws it closer to the tarmac. All the design elements in the tail have been lifted compared to the wagon, and the SQ5 Sportback gets its own unique diffuser. It sits 30mm lower than the Q5 version of the Sportback, and the lack of roof rails and large 21-inch wheels really help give it that squat stance. Compared to the wagon, it's just 5mm longer, which is nothing. And it's also just 2mm shorter, which is 40% of nothing. And there are 3 wheel designs to choose from at no cost, including this that Audi calls Turbine. There's no upcharge for the Pearl Effect Daytona Grey either, one of the 8 available body colours. That said, our test car loads in a little over 10 grand's worth of extra goodies, such as these all-dancing animated OLED taillights that come at a $2,500 upcharge. Suspension is adaptive with steel springs as standard, but you can have air suspension that adds $2,250 to the bottom line. Our car also gets an optional rear Quattro Sport differential, which adds around another 3 grand. Black exterior styling, that's $1,100, and Carbon Atlas inlay work nudges the outlay up another $1,200. Call it $120,940 before on-roads. But how does it compare for size on the inside? The least sexy area of the cabin is the boot space, but it's where the main conjecture lies in coupe-shaped SUVs. In short, you lose 20 litres of volume compared to the wagon, which sounds like a lot if you're talking about milk on your cornflakes. In effect, you still get 500 litres, and that 4% penalty is lost mostly up around the glass area. The rear seat is also triple split for a bit of added load flexibility, and it tilts and slides so you can balance cargo space and rear seat accommodation. So really, there's not much compromise in boot space, but let's find out how this coupe roofline affects rear headroom. From the seat base to the ceiling, the Sportback only loses 16mm to the wagon. For me, that's the difference of a haircut. So hardly a deal breaker. There's decent enough room in the back here for 2 adults, and you also get 3-zone climate control. Up front, there's a slightly different look to the dash than the wagon and no compromise in space, and it's one area that Audi continues to kick it out of the ballpark. You get these tasty Napa leather sports seats, virtual cockpit digital instrumentation, a fully featured 10.1-inch infotainment system that has a fantastic surround camera system. It's comfortable and wonderfully presented, but if there's one criticism, it's that most of the fit out is common with the regular Q5 version. That said, the SQ5 does feature some unique touches, such as the variable headrests, a head-up display, 30 colour ambient lighting, and a 19-speaker Bang & Olufsen sound system. But where the SQ5's near 25 grand premium starts to pay dividends over the regular Q5 petrol version is under the skin. And the real fun starts with 700 Newton meters. There's less of a shove and more of a tidal wave of thrust when you uncork the 3-litre V6 turbo diesel. At 700 Newton meters, Bundy's on at 1750 RPM, but peak power of 251 kilowatts is all over by 4 grand. But the 8-speed conventional auto does a great job of plucking the sweet spot of the engine and keeping it on the boil. It's a boomerang return for oiler power, which debuted on the first generation SQ5 back in 2013. There was also a supercharged petrol V6 version, but Australia passed on that. When the second generation Q5 lobbed in 2017, the Top Dog S version arrived in petrol form only, with the diesel taking a 3-year hiatus. TDI returned to the local fold with last year's pre-facelifted limited edition, with a distinctive new technical twist under the bonnet. In high-spec plus tune, the old twin-turbo diesel V6 made 250 kilowatts and 700 Newton meters. This new EPC version makes precisely 1 extra kilowatt. No difference, right? But it's how it makes output that is quite different. This third generation V6 is a single turbocharger, but it also has an electric compressor further upstream beyond the intercooler. The EPC is powered by a 48-volt electric system that provides 2.4 bar of charge at up to 70,000 RPM. The real benefit comes in response in rolling into the throttle or at part throttle, and peak torque now arrives lower in the RPM range. It feels quick when it needs to be, but the real benefit is the added flexibility. Be gentle on the throttle and it'll ride the torque wave in a higher gear. It's quite a gem of an engine, smooth and refined at a cruise with little hint of oiler rattle. Dig in and there's a rich, almost V8-like soundtrack, and a lot of that comes from mechanical amplification in the exhaust. Pin it in manual mode and the diesel remains punchy and alert in response, but left to its own devices, the powertrain can get caught pausing a little bit before the diesel mans the battle stations. Audi reckons the Top Dog Sportback will hit 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 5.1 seconds, which is quicker than the old petrol SQ5, but no swifter than the original TDI wagon. At 7.1 litres per 100 combined, there's no real improvement in consumption for the breed, despite the so-called mild hybrid smarts said to bring as much as 0.7 of a litre benefit. That's because the SQ5 Sportback nudges 2.1 tonnes, which is partly due to that complex 48-volt system for the compressor and the rolling stop-start. The Quattro system can shuffle up to 85% of the torque rearward, and once you get on it, the chassis is actually quite neutral. Dial-up dynamic and the air suspension can muster up quite a decent amount of body control. It sits flat in the corners and there's a fair amount of accuracy in the handling, despite the fairly portly heft. Point to point, it's quick and sure-footed, and there's enough grip and drive from the 255mm rubber that the optional Sport Stiff doesn't do all that much unless you're really up it for the rent. The ride-in comfort is actually quite pliant, and there's a minimal amount of tyre slap despite the big 21-inch wheels. On balance, the SQ5 Sportback fits the bill best as a grand tourer that also offers enough dynamic competency when the roads and conditions allow. And in a big country, the torquey and frugal diesel does make a lot of sense given the tyranny of distance. The oiler also presents a point of difference from key competitors from BMW and Mercedes-AMG. But the biggest positive is that there's really not that much compromise in opting for the Sportback body style. And we like the cut of its coupe-like jib, and reckon it's worth the extra splurge over the SQ5 wagon. What do you think? Put your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date.